Chapter 1. Most people believe they are thinking when they are merely reacting. That distinction alone changes everything. From the outside, reaction looks like thought. Words are spoken. Messages are sent. Decisions are made. Plans are formed. But beneath the surface, what often drives those actions is not clarity. It is momentum. Emotional momentum, psychological momentum, social momentum. The mind moves quickly, and speed creates the illusion of intelligence. But speed is not clarity. Clarity is slow. Clarity requires distance from emotion, distance from noise, and distance from the urgent voice inside that insists something must be done immediately. The modern world does not reward slowness. It rewards immediacy, immediate replies, immediate opinions, immediate outrage, immediate success. And so we train ourselves to respond without examining the internal forces that shape our responses. We mistake intensity for truth. We mistake confidence for correctness. We mistake familiarity for accuracy. And gradually, without noticing, we lose the ability to think independently. Clear thinking begins the moment you recognize that your mind is not always your ally. It is a powerful instrument, but it is not neutral. It is biased toward survival, not truth, toward emotional relief, not rational precision, toward certainty, not accuracy. When someone criticizes you, your heart rate rises before logic engages. When an opportunity appears, excitement rushes in before risk analysis begins. When you feel ignored, anger forms a narrative before facts are gathered. The mind is constantly constructing stories. It fills gaps instantly. It hates uncertainty. It would rather be confidently wrong than calmly unsure. This is the first obstacle to clarity, the need for psychological comfort. Human beings are uncomfortable with ambiguity. We want answers. We want positions. We want conclusions. We want closure. The discomfort of, "I don't know," is often stronger than the desire to know correctly. So we choose the quickest explanation available, even if it is incomplete. Clear thinkers resist that impulse. They tolerate uncertainty longer than others. When a conflict occurs, they do not immediately assume intention. When a rumor spreads, they do not immediately adopt belief. When an idea feels attractive, they do not immediately endorse it. They allow space between stimulus and response. That space is where intelligence lives. Emotion is not the enemy of clear thinking, but emotional reactivity is. There is a difference. Emotion provides information. Reactivity removes evaluation. When you are reactive, you are not choosing. You are discharging. You are relieving tension. You are seeking emotional equilibrium, not truth. Consider how often decisions are made to reduce discomfort rather than to improve outcomes. A difficult conversation is avoided because anxiety rises. An impulsive purchase is made because stress needs relief. An opportunity is abandoned because fear creates catastrophic imagery. In each case, the decision feels justified in the moment because it reduces emotional pressure. But relief is not wisdom. Clear thinking requires learning to sit with emotional pressure without immediately acting on it. This is profoundly uncomfortable at first. The brain interprets delay as danger. It signals urgency. It pushes for movement. But urgency is often internal, not external. The person who can wait, even briefly, gains enormous advantage. Waiting allows emotion to settle. It allows additional information to surface. It allows contradictions to emerge. Many decisions that feel urgent at night lose their intensity by morning. Many confrontations that feel necessary in anger feel excessive in calmness. Time filters distortion. This is why some of the most disciplined thinkers adopt simple rules. They do not send important messages while angry. They do not make financial commitments while euphoric. They do not make life decisions while exhausted. They understand that the quality of thought fluctuates with biological state. Clarity is fragile. Sleep deprivation reduces cognitive accuracy. Stress narrows perspective. Social pressure amplifies conformity. The brain under pressure becomes simplistic. It seeks black and white answers. It exaggerates extremes. It reduces nuance. And nuance is essential for clear thinking. Most real-world problems are complex. They involve trade-offs, probabilities, and incomplete data. Yet the emotional brain prefers certainty and simplicity. It prefers narratives with heroes and villains, causes and effects, right and wrong. Complexity requires cognitive effort, and the brain conserves energy whenever possible. This is why misinformation spreads so easily. Simple explanations travel faster than complex ones. Strong emotions travel faster than careful analysis. The mind is drawn to what feels coherent, even if it is inaccurate. To think clearly, you must become comfortable questioning what feels obvious. Ask yourself, what evidence supports this belief? What evidence contradicts it? What assumptions am I making? What emotions are influencing this judgment? What information might I be missing? These questions interrupt automaticity. Automaticity is efficient for routine tasks, but dangerous for meaningful decisions. The majority of daily life runs on mental shortcuts. These shortcuts are useful. They allow you to function without analyzing every minor action. But when applied to relationships, career choices, financial decisions, or moral judgments, shortcuts become distortions. One of the most powerful distortions is confirmation bias, the tendency to seek information that supports existing beliefs while ignoring contradictory evidence. This bias operates silently. It makes you feel objective while you are selectively filtering reality. Clear thinkers deliberately expose themselves to opposing perspectives, not because they enjoy discomfort, but because they value accuracy more than ego. They understand that being wrong is not failure. Refusing to examine error is. Ego is another barrier to clarity. When identity becomes attached to opinion, thinking becomes defensive. The goal shifts from discovering truth to protecting self-image. This is why debates rarely change minds. Participants are not evaluating evidence. They are defending identity. To think clearly, you must detach identity from belief. Your ideas are not you. Your conclusions are not permanent. Intellectual humility is strength, not weakness. The ability to update your perspective in light of new evidence is a sign of cognitive maturity. Another obstacle to clear thinking is overconfidence. The more familiar a topic feels, the more certain we become, regardless of actual expertise. Familiarity creates illusion of understanding. We confuse exposure with mastery. Clear thinkers frequently test their understanding by explaining concepts simply. If you cannot explain something clearly, you do not fully understand it. This practice reveals gaps that confidence hides. Social influence further complicates thinking. Humans are tribal. We instinctively align with groups. Agreement provides belonging. Disagreement risks exclusion. As a result, many beliefs are adopted not because they are examined, but because they are shared. The courage to think independently requires emotional resilience. It requires the willingness to stand alone temporarily. It requires internal stability that does not depend on constant validation. But independence does not mean contrarianism. Clear thinking is not reflexive opposition. It is thoughtful evaluation. It is the quiet assessment that occurs before alignment. You may notice that clear thinking demands patience, humility, and emotional regulation. These are not dramatic traits. They do not attract applause, but they create consistent, high-quality decisions over time. Decision-making improves when you shift from immediate certainty to probabilistic thinking. Instead of asking, "Is this right or wrong?" ask, "What is the likelihood this is correct?" Instead of demanding guarantees, evaluate risks and potential outcomes. Life rarely offers certainty. It offers probability. This shift reduces anxiety because it aligns expectations with reality. Uncertainty becomes manageable rather than threatening. Another powerful practice is mental simulation. Before making a decision, imagine future scenarios. If you choose this path, what might unfold in 1 year? 5 years? What challenges might arise? What regrets might appear? This exercise slows impulsivity and strengthens foresight. Yet, even with all these tools, perfection is impossible. Clear thinking does not eliminate mistakes. It reduces unnecessary ones. It increases the odds of sound judgment. It builds a pattern of thoughtful action rather than reactive behavior. Over time, this pattern compounds. People who think clearly earn trust. Their decisions appear calm, measured, stable. They are not easily manipulated by urgency or flattery. They are not easily destabilized by criticism. Their steadiness becomes reputation. But internally, what they practice is simple. They pause. They question. They examine emotion. They gather information. They tolerate uncertainty. They detach ego. They adjust when needed. None of these actions are dramatic, but together they form the architecture of clear thought. As you continue listening to this audiobook, you will begin to notice your own mental habits. You will notice moments when emotion tries to rush you. You will notice when assumptions form too quickly. You will notice when ego tightens around opinion. Do not judge yourself for these moments. Awareness itself is progress. The goal is not to silence emotion or eliminate instinct. The goal is to integrate them with reflection. Emotion provides data. Reflection provides interpretation. Together, they create wisdom. Clarity is not loud. It does not argue aggressively. It does not rush. It does not need to dominate conversation. It observes. It evaluates. It waits until the internal noise quiets. And when it speaks, its decisions carry weight. In the next chapter, we will explore how mental noise, constant distraction, information overload, and fragmented attention erodes your ability to think deeply, and how to rebuild the internal environment necessary for sustained clarity. For now, remember this. The quality of your life is determined less by how fast you think, and more by how clearly you do. And clarity begins with the courage to pause. Chapter 2. Clarity does not disappear because intelligence disappears. It disappears because attention fragments. The modern mind is not overwhelmed by complexity. It is overwhelmed by interruption. Every day, your thinking is divided into pieces so small that depth becomes impossible. A notification interrupts reflection. A message redirects focus. A headline provokes emotion. A short video resets attention span. Each interruption seems harmless in isolation. Together, they dismantle the architecture required for sustained thought. Deep thinking requires continuity. It requires staying with a problem long enough for nuance to emerge. It requires silence long enough for subconscious processing to surface. But silence has become rare. And without silence, the mind becomes reactive rather than reflective. There is a cognitive cost to switching attention. When you move from one task to another, your brain does not instantly reset. Residue remains. A portion of your attention stays attached to the previous stimulus. This phenomenon is subtle but powerful. It means that frequent task switching reduces the quality of thinking even when you believe you are managing it efficiently. Shallow engagement produces shallow conclusions. When you skim information, you form impressions rather than understanding. When you scroll rapidly, you absorb emotion more than insight. When you read without focus, you retain fragments rather than structure. Over time, this pattern trains the brain to prefer stimulation over depth. Clear thinking requires resisting this conditioning. The ability to sit with a single idea for an extended period has become a competitive advantage. While others consume endless streams of content, the clear thinker chooses deliberate input. They limit noise not because they reject modern life, but because they recognize the fragility of attention. Attention is a finite resource. Where you direct it determines the shape of your mind. Consider how often you begin reflecting on something important, perhaps a career decision, a relationship concern, a long-term goal, only to feel a subtle urge to check your phone. That urge is not random. It is neurological conditioning. The brain has learned that small bursts of novelty provide quick dopamine rewards. Deep thinking, by contrast, often feels slow and effortful before it becomes rewarding. But depth always produces higher quality outcomes. When you remain with a complex issue long enough, patterns begin to reveal themselves. Contradictions become visible. Assumptions surface. Emotional distortions soften. The initial reaction gives way to layered analysis. This process cannot occur in fragmented intervals. It requires sustained focus. Most people underestimate how long true thinking takes. They expect immediate clarity. They expect instant certainty. But important decisions often require incubation. The mind needs time to integrate information. Some of the most intelligent conclusions arise not during active analysis, but after a period of disengagement, a quiet walk, a shower, a moment before sleep. These are environments where the subconscious organizes material without pressure. However, this only works when the mind has first been fed structured input. If attention has been scattered all day across trivial stimuli, there is nothing substantial to integrate. The quality of your mental diet matters. Just as the body reflects nutritional intake, the mind reflects informational intake. If you constantly consume outrage, your thinking becomes reactive. If you consume shallow commentary, your reasoning becomes simplistic. If you consume conflicting opinions without evaluation, your judgment becomes unstable. Clear thinkers are selective. They do not expose themselves indiscriminately to every available opinion. They choose depth over volume. They read fewer sources, but more carefully. They listen more than they speak. They reflect more than they broadcast. This selectivity is not isolation. It is filtration. Another subtle threat to clarity is urgency culture. Modern systems create artificial pressure. Everything appears immediate. Emails demand quick replies. News cycles refresh hourly. Social trends change daily. Under constant urgency, the nervous system remains slightly elevated, and an elevated nervous system reduces cognitive flexibility. Stress narrows perception. When you feel rushed, your brain defaults to familiar solutions. It avoids exploration. It prefers speed over creativity. Over time, chronic low-level stress becomes normal, and reduced clarity becomes accepted as standard functioning. But it is not standard. It is conditioned. Reclaiming clarity requires deliberate slowing. This does not mean abandoning productivity. It means structuring your day in a way that protects cognitive depth. Schedule uninterrupted thinking periods. Remove digital distractions during meaningful work. Resist the urge to respond immediately unless truly necessary. Delay reaction when possible. At first, this may feel uncomfortable. You may fear missing something important. But most interruptions are not critical. They are habitual. Clear thinking also requires boredom. Boredom has become misunderstood. It is often viewed as something to eliminate. But boredom is the doorway to original thought. When external stimulation decreases, internal processing increases. The mind begins to wander constructively. It forms connections between ideas. It revisits unresolved questions. If every spare moment is filled with stimulation, this internal synthesis never occurs. Consider the difference between input and integration. Many people focus exclusively on input, reading, watching, listening. But without integration, knowledge remains fragmented. Integration requires reflection. It requires asking, what does this mean? How does this connect to what I already know? Where might this be flawed? This questioning deepens understanding. Another factor that erodes clarity is emotional contagion. Humans unconsciously absorb the emotional states of those around them. If your environment is anxious, you become subtly anxious. If your digital feed is outraged, you become subtly reactive. You may believe your thoughts are independent, when in fact they are influenced by ambient emotion. Clear thinkers monitor their environment carefully. They recognize that mental state shapes judgment. They distance themselves from unnecessary volatility. They choose calm environments for important decisions. They do not argue while emotionally charged. They wait. There is also the illusion of multitasking. The brain does not truly perform multiple cognitive tasks simultaneously at high quality. It switches rapidly between them. Each switch depletes cognitive energy. Over time, this depletion reduces analytical capacity. The individual may feel busy and productive, but thinking becomes shallow. Single tasking restores depth. When you dedicate full attention to one problem, you engage working memory more effectively. You notice details. You track complexity. You detect inconsistencies. This sustained engagement strengthens neural pathways associated with reasoning. Clarity is not a personality trait. It is a practiced skill. The more you protect attention, the more powerful it becomes. The more you allow fragmentation, the weaker it becomes. Sleep also plays a crucial role. Exhaustion reduces prefrontal cortex function, the region responsible for judgment, impulse control, and rational analysis. Under fatigue, emotional centers dominate. Decisions become reactive. Risks are misjudged. Small problems feel larger. This is why important decisions made late at night often appear flawed in the morning. Physical state influences cognitive state more than most people realize. Nutrition, hydration, exercise, and rest all shape thinking quality. The brain is a biological organ. It cannot operate optimally under neglect. Yet even with perfect habits, distraction will always exist. The key is intentionality. Ask yourself regularly, what deserves my attention right now? Is this stimulus meaningful or merely stimulating? Am I engaging deeply or skimming superficially? These questions recalibrate focus. There is profound power in quiet concentration. When you spend uninterrupted time analyzing a single issue, your thinking becomes layered. First, you observe surface facts. Then you notice patterns. Then you question assumptions. Then you consider alternatives. Finally, you evaluate trade-offs. This sequence cannot occur in scattered intervals. Most poor decisions are not caused by lack of intelligence. They are caused by insufficient depth. The individual simply did not stay with the issue long enough. Clarity also benefits from writing. When thoughts remain internal, they feel coherent even when they are not. Writing exposes logical gaps. It forces structure. It slows mental speed. Many complex decisions become clearer once written out in detail. Pros and cons. Risks and benefits. Short-term and long-term effects. Writing transforms vague emotion into tangible reasoning. Similarly, speaking thoughts aloud can reveal inconsistency. When you articulate reasoning to another person, you detect weakness. This is why dialogue, when calm and thoughtful, sharpens clarity. However, constant exposure to external opinion without personal reflection weakens independence. If every question is answered by searching immediately for someone else's conclusion, your own analytical muscles weaken. Clear thinking requires mental effort. It requires wrestling with uncertainty before outsourcing judgment. As you cultivate deeper focus, you may notice a shift. Conversations feel different. Information feels layered rather than overwhelming. Decisions feel measured rather than rushed. This is not because life has simplified, but because your processing has strengthened. The world will not slow down for you. Notifications will continue. Opinions will multiply. Urgency will persist. But you can choose how you engage. You can choose fewer inputs, deeper reflection, intentional pauses, structured thinking time, and emotional regulation before decision. Clarity is not accidental. It is designed. And when designed consistently, it transforms the quality of every decision you make. It is illusion. Ignorance is simple. When you do not know something, the absence is visible. You can admit it. You can seek information. You can learn. Illusion is more dangerous. It convinces you that you understand when you do not. It creates confidence without accuracy. It hides distortion beneath familiarity. The human brain evolved for survival, not objectivity. It developed shortcuts to make fast decisions under pressure. These shortcuts were efficient in environments where threats were immediate and information was limited. But in a complex modern world, those same shortcuts often mislead. These mental shortcuts are called cognitive biases. They operate silently. They do not feel like errors. They feel like intuition. One of the most powerful biases is the tendency to seek patterns even where none exist. The brain prefers order. Randomness feels uncomfortable. So when events occur close together, we assume causation. When outcomes repeat, we assume inevitability. When something happens once, we begin expecting recurrence. This pattern-seeking instinct is useful in some contexts. It allows learning from experience. But it also creates false conclusions. You may believe a strategy works because it succeeded twice. You may assume a person is untrustworthy because of one isolated behavior. You may interpret coincidence as destiny. Clear thinking requires asking, is this truly a pattern, or am I imposing structure on randomness? Another bias operates through availability. The mind estimates probability based on how easily examples come to memory. If you recently heard about an accident, you may overestimate the likelihood of danger. If you recently experienced rejection, you may overestimate the probability of future rejection. Emotional intensity strengthens memory, and strong memory distorts risk perception. This is why dramatic events dominate judgment. A vivid failure feels more significant than a quiet success. A powerful criticism outweighs multiple compliments. A recent mistake overshadows years of competence. To think clearly, you must separate emotional vividness from statistical reality. Ask yourself, am I judging this based on data or based on how strongly it affected me? There is also the bias of confirmation. Once you form a belief, the brain begins filtering information to support it. You notice evidence that aligns. You ignore evidence that contradicts. Over time, your perspective feels increasingly justified, not because it is correct, but because you have curated reinforcing input. This bias strengthens identity attachment. The belief becomes part of who you are. Challenging, it feels like personal attack. Clear thinkers deliberately seek disconfirming evidence. They ask, what would prove me wrong? What information would change my mind? They treat belief as hypothesis rather than identity. This requires intellectual humility. It requires comfort with revision. It requires detachment from ego. Another subtle distortion is overconfidence. Research repeatedly shows that people overestimate their knowledge and predictive ability. When outcomes are uncertain, we imagine our judgment is more precise than it is. When making forecasts, we underestimate complexity. Overconfidence creates risk blindness. It encourages premature decisions. It discourages second opinions. It suppresses doubt, even when doubt is appropriate. Clarity involves calibrating confidence, not eliminating it, but aligning it with evidence. When evidence is strong, confidence may increase. When evidence is limited, confidence should decrease. Few people practice this consciously. There is also the tendency to anchor to first impressions. The initial piece of information you receive influences everything that follows. If someone is introduced as highly successful, you interpret their behavior differently than if they are introduced as inexperienced. If an initial price is high, subsequent prices feel cheaper in comparison. Anchoring shapes perception subtly. Clear thinking requires pausing after first impressions and asking, what independent evidence supports this? Am I evaluating fairly, or am I adjusting around an initial reference point? Another distortion involves loss aversion. The pain of losing is psychologically stronger than the pleasure of gaining. As a result, people often make decisions to avoid loss rather than to pursue benefit. They hold failing investments too long. They stay in unproductive situations because leaving feels like admitting loss. But refusing to accept small losses often creates larger ones. Clarity requires evaluating decisions based on future potential, not past attachment. The question is not how much you have already invested. The question is, what path maximizes future outcomes? Emotional attachment clouds this evaluation. Social proof introduces another layer of distortion. When uncertain, humans look to others for guidance. If many people believe something, it feels safer to believe it too. Popularity becomes proxy for correctness. But history repeatedly demonstrates that consensus can be wrong. Clear thinkers respect collective intelligence, but do not surrender independent evaluation. They ask, is this belief widespread because it is accurate or because it is comfortable? There is also the bias of hindsight. After an outcome occurs, it feels predictable. You reconstruct memory to align with result. You tell yourself you knew it all along. This illusion prevents learning. If everything appears obvious after the fact, you never analyze uncertainty properly. True clarity involves reviewing past decisions honestly. What information did you have at the time? What assumptions were made? What risks were considered? Without this analysis, improvement stagnates. Another cognitive trap is emotional reasoning. You assume that because something feels true, it must be true. If you feel insecure, you assume you are inadequate. If you feel suspicious, you assume betrayal. If you feel confident, you assume competence. Emotions are signals, not conclusions. Clear thinkers examine feelings without surrendering to them. They ask, what is this emotion telling me? What alternative explanations exist? What evidence supports this interpretation? This practice prevents impulsive decisions based purely on mood. There is also the illusion of control. Humans prefer believing they influence outcomes more than they actually do. This creates motivation, but it can also produce unrealistic expectations. When outcomes depend heavily on external variables, overestimating control leads to frustration and miscalculated risk. Clarity requires distinguishing between controllable and uncontrollable factors. Effort should focus where influence exists. Acceptance should apply where it does not. Perhaps the most subtle bias is narrative construction. The brain constantly builds stories to explain events. These stories create coherence. They connect cause and effect. They assign motive. But often, these narratives simplify complexity. A failed project becomes a story of incompetence. A disagreement becomes a story of disrespect. A missed opportunity becomes a story of destiny. Yet reality is rarely so linear. Clear thinking disrupts narrative certainty. It asks, what other explanations are possible? What factors might I be overlooking? How might someone else interpret this differently? Multiple perspectives weaken distortion. Importantly, eliminating bias entirely is impossible. Bias is embedded in cognition. The goal is not perfection, it is awareness. When you recognize bias operating, its influence decreases. You begin to notice when you are defending rather than evaluating. You notice when confidence exceeds evidence. You notice when emotion shapes interpretation. This awareness creates pause, and pause creates space for correction. Many intelligent individuals remain trapped by bias because intelligence alone does not protect against distortion. In fact, higher intelligence sometimes strengthens bias. It enables more sophisticated rationalization. You construct better arguments for flawed conclusions. Clarity requires sincerity more than intellect. You must genuinely want accuracy more than validation. You must prefer being correct over being right. Over time, practicing bias awareness changes how you engage with information. You become slower to judge, more curious, less reactive. You begin asking deeper questions rather than seeking quick conclusions. When someone presents an argument, instead of immediately agreeing or disagreeing, you evaluate structure. What assumptions underlie it? What evidence supports it? What biases might influence both sides? This method transforms conversation. It shifts from emotional exchange to intellectual exploration. In personal decisions, bias awareness protects you from self-deception. You recognize when attachment is driving persistence. You recognize when fear is exaggerating risk. You recognize when ego is resisting feedback. This does not eliminate discomfort. In fact, clarity often increases discomfort temporarily. It reveals inconvenient truths. It forces difficult adjustments. But long-term stability grows from short-term honesty. As you continue strengthening your thinking, you will notice a reduction in impulsive certainty. You will speak with measured confidence rather than exaggerated conviction. You will ask questions more frequently. You will revise opinions without embarrassment. This is not weakness. It is intellectual maturity. The world often rewards loud certainty. But history respects thoughtful precision. Clear thinking is not about having all answers. It is about improving the quality of the questions you ask before deciding. Chapter 4. Understanding how the mind becomes distorted is valuable. But awareness alone does not guarantee better decisions. Insight must be translated into structure. Without structure, even intelligent individuals drift back into impulsive patterns under pressure. Clear decision-making is not accidental. It is systematic. Most poor decisions share a common trait. They are made inside emotional turbulence, without defined criteria, and without long-term evaluation. The individual feels urgency, evaluates quickly, and commits. Later, reflection reveals overlooked variables. To reduce this pattern, you must build a personal decision framework. A consistent internal process that activates whenever stakes are meaningful. The first principle of strong decision-making is defining the actual problem. This sounds obvious, yet many decisions fail because the real issue was never clarified. Instead, individuals react to symptoms. They change jobs to escape discomfort without identifying the source of dissatisfaction. They end relationships to eliminate conflict without examining communication patterns. They pursue opportunities because they feel attractive without assessing alignment with long-term direction. Clarity begins by asking, what exactly am I deciding? Not what feels uncomfortable, not what feels urgent, but what is the precise question at hand? Often, writing the decision in a single sentence reveals confusion. Vague internal tension becomes concrete, and once defined clearly, evaluation becomes possible. The second principle is separating facts from interpretation. When emotionally involved, these blend together. For example, if a colleague speaks briefly in a meeting, the fact is brevity. The interpretation may be disrespect. But interpretation is assumption layered onto observation. Clear thinkers consciously divide the two. They list objective facts first. Then, they list interpretations separately. This simple practice prevents premature narrative construction. The third principle is expanding time perspective. Short-term emotion frequently dominates long-term consequence. A decision may feel satisfying today, but harmful over years. Conversely, a decision may feel uncomfortable immediately, but beneficial over time. Before committing, ask, how will I feel about this in 1 year? In 5 years? If this decision became permanent, would I accept it? Time projection introduces depth. It shifts thinking from relief-seeking to outcome-oriented evaluation. The fourth principle is probability assessment. Life rarely offers guarantees. Most decisions involve uncertainty. Instead of demanding certainty, assign likelihood. How likely is this path to produce the desired result? What risks exist? How severe would consequences be if the outcome fails? This approach transforms vague fear into structured analysis. Risk becomes measurable rather than emotional. The fifth principle is scenario testing. Imagine the best possible outcome. Imagine the worst. Imagine the most realistic middle ground. For each scenario, evaluate preparedness. Can you tolerate the worst-case scenario? Does the best case justify the risk? This method reduces impulsive optimism and exaggerated pessimism simultaneously. Another critical component of structured decision-making is identifying core values. Decisions misaligned with personal values create long-term friction. External rewards may mask internal dissatisfaction temporarily, but conflict eventually surfaces. Clarity requires knowing what principles govern your life. Integrity, stability, growth, autonomy, contribution. Whatever values guide you must inform evaluation. When a decision aligns with core values, confidence increases. When it conflicts, hesitation intensifies. Many people struggle with decisions because they attempt to satisfy incompatible priorities simultaneously. For example, seeking maximum security and maximum freedom often conflict. Seeking rapid advancement and minimal stress rarely coexist. Clarity involves recognizing trade-offs. Every meaningful decision sacrifices something. Denying this creates disappointment. Accepting trade-offs creates maturity. Ask yourself, what am I willing to sacrifice for this outcome? Time, comfort, status, predictability. If unwilling to sacrifice required costs, the decision is misaligned. Another powerful framework involves reversible versus irreversible decisions. Some decisions can be adjusted later, others cannot. Clear thinkers allocate different levels of analysis accordingly. Reversible decisions require less perfectionism. Irreversible decisions require deeper evaluation. Treating all decisions with equal intensity exhausts cognitive resources. Differentiation improves efficiency. Consultation also strengthens clarity, but selectively. Seeking advice from too many sources creates noise. Seeking advice from carefully chosen, thoughtful individuals enhances perspective. However, consultation should supplement thinking, not replace it. Others may offer insight, but responsibility remains yours. Over-reliance on external validation weakens internal judgment. Emotional regulation remains central throughout this process. If emotional intensity is high, delay major decisions. Strong emotion narrows thinking. Even a 24-hour pause can transform perception. Many regrettable actions occur during temporary emotional spikes. Patience protects clarity. There is also power in pre-commitment. Before entering high-pressure situations, define your standards. For example, determine acceptable risk levels before investing. Define boundaries before negotiation. Decide non-negotiables before relationship conflict. When standards are predetermined, emotion has less influence. Regret analysis is another advanced tool. Imagine yourself in the future looking back. Which choice would you regret more, action or inaction? Sometimes fear prevents necessary risk. Other times, impatience pushes premature commitment. Future perspective balances both. Clarity also benefits from simplicity. When decision criteria become excessively complex, confusion increases. Identify the few variables that truly matter. Eliminate secondary noise. Focus on primary impact factors. Complexity often disguises indecision. Yet, even with perfect structure, uncertainty remains. No framework eliminates unpredictability. At some point, you must choose. This is where trust in your process matters. If you have defined the problem clearly, separated fact from interpretation, evaluated time horizons, assessed probability, acknowledged trade-offs, aligned with values, and regulated emotion, then the decision, even if imperfect, is thoughtful. And thoughtful decisions build self-trust. Self-trust is crucial for long-term clarity. When you consistently follow a rational process, outcomes, whether positive or negative, become learning experiences rather than identity threats. You review results objectively. You refine frameworks. You strengthen future judgment. Without process, outcomes feel chaotic. Success appears accidental. Failure feels personal. Process creates stability. Over time, you will notice reduced anxiety around decisions, not because choices become easier, but because evaluation becomes reliable. You know how you will approach complexity. You know you will pause before reacting. You know you will examine assumptions before committing. This predictability calms the mind. Decision fatigue is another factor worth understanding. The brain has limited capacity for repeated complex choices. As fatigue increases, impulsivity rises. This is why trivial daily decisions can drain mental energy. Clear thinkers reduce unnecessary choices. They automate minor routines. They simplify lifestyle where possible. This preserves cognitive energy for meaningful evaluation. Finally, accept that perfect clarity is rare. Often you choose with partial information. The goal is not flawless foresight. It is reasonable foresight. Once a decision is made, commit fully. Doubt after commitment weakens execution. Reevaluation is appropriate only when new significant information emerges, not when anxiety fluctuates. Execution quality influences outcome as much as decision quality. As you integrate structured decision-making into your life, you will feel a shift from emotional oscillation to measured stability. Problems will still arise. Complexity will still exist, but your internal response will be steadier. You will recognize when to pause, when to analyze, when to consult, when to act. And this steadiness compounds across years. Chapter 5. Before you decide what to do, you have already decided who you believe you are. And that belief quietly shapes every choice that follows. Most people assume decisions are based on logic, opportunity, or circumstance. But beneath surface reasoning lies something deeper: identity. The internal story you carry about yourself influences what you attempt, what you avoid, what you tolerate, and what you believe you deserve. If you see yourself as cautious, you will interpret risk differently. If you see yourself as unlucky, you will interpret setbacks differently. If you see yourself as capable, you will approach difficulty differently. Identity filters perception before analysis even begins. Clear thinking, therefore, requires examining not just the decision, but the decision maker. Many limitations people attribute to external barriers are rooted in internal definitions. Someone who believes, "I am not good at business," may unconsciously avoid opportunities, interpret small mistakes as proof of incompetence, and retreat prematurely. The decision to withdraw feels rational. In reality, it is identity protection. Similarly, someone who believes, "I must always succeed," may avoid necessary experimentation because failure threatens self-image. Again, the decision appears logical, but it is driven by identity preservation. Identity can either expand or restrict clarity. When identity becomes rigid, thinking becomes defensive. You protect your self-concept rather than evaluating reality objectively. Feedback feels threatening. New information feels destabilizing. You unconsciously interpret events in ways that preserve internal narrative. Clear thinkers hold identity lightly. This does not mean lacking confidence. It means understanding that identity is flexible, evolving, and subject to refinement. Instead of saying, "I am bad at this," they say, "I have not developed this skill yet." Instead of saying, "I am always unlucky," they say, "This outcome did not go as planned." Flexible identity creates adaptable reasoning. Another powerful influence of identity is group affiliation. Humans define themselves not only individually, but collectively. Political identity, professional identity, cultural identity, social identity, all shape belief systems. Once identity fuses with group membership, independent thinking becomes difficult. Agreement feels safe. Disagreement feels disloyal. You may reject accurate information simply because it conflicts with group narrative. Clear thinking requires occasional separation from collective identity. It requires asking, "If I did not belong to this group, would I still believe this?" If my identity were not attached to this position, how would I evaluate the evidence? This question alone can reveal hidden bias. There is also the identity of past experience. Many individuals anchor themselves to previous outcomes. I failed once, therefore I am not capable. I succeeded before, therefore I will succeed again. Both conclusions oversimplify reality. Past performance informs probability, but it does not define destiny. Clarity involves evaluating present variables independently from outdated self-labels. Self-esteem plays a subtle role as well. When self-worth is fragile, decision-making becomes protective. You avoid situations that may expose weakness. You seek environments where validation is guaranteed. You overestimate risk in areas where identity feels vulnerable. In contrast, stable self-worth allows experimentation. You can attempt difficult paths because failure does not redefine your value. You can receive criticism without collapse. You can adjust strategy without shame. Confidence grounded in process rather than ego strengthens clarity. Another important dimension is the difference between external identity and internal identity. External identity is how you are perceived, status, titles, achievements. Internal identity is how you evaluate yourself privately. When decisions are driven primarily by external identity, clarity weakens. You may choose paths that enhance reputation but diminish fulfillment. You may reject opportunities that align with personal growth because they appear less impressive socially. Clarity requires alignment between external action and internal principle. Ask yourself honestly, am I choosing this because it aligns with who I want to become, or because it protects how I want to appear? These two motivations often conflict. Fear-based identity is another hidden force. If your internal narrative is shaped by past trauma, rejection, or failure, decisions may become avoidance-oriented. You may prioritize safety above growth. You may interpret neutral situations as threatening. You may assume negative intent prematurely. Clear thinking requires differentiating between historical memory and present reality. Not every disagreement is abandonment. Not every delay is rejection. Not every obstacle is proof of incapability. The mind uses past experience to predict future events. But if past events were emotionally intense, prediction may become exaggerated. Identity refinement involves conscious rewriting. This does not mean inventing fantasy narratives. It means updating self-definition according to evidence and growth. If you have developed discipline, acknowledge it. If you have gained resilience, integrate it. If you have acquired new skills, allow identity to expand accordingly. Many people cling unconsciously to outdated self-concepts long after they have evolved. Clear thinkers perform regular internal audits. They examine their assumptions about themselves. They ask, is this belief still accurate? Where did it originate? Is it serving me or limiting me? You may discover that certain beliefs were inherited rather than earned. Family narratives, cultural expectations, early labels from authority figures. These may have shaped identity long before conscious evaluation. Once recognized, they can be re-evaluated. Another dimension worth examining is moral identity. Many decisions are influenced by the desire to see oneself as good, fair, or principled. While this motivation can elevate behavior, it can also distort perception. You may justify questionable decisions because they align with your moral self-image. You may condemn others harshly to reinforce your own righteousness. Clarity requires separating action from self-justification. It requires asking not only whether something feels morally satisfying, but whether it is objectively consistent and constructive. There is also the identity of competence. Some individuals derive identity from being knowledgeable. When confronted with unfamiliar territory, they may resist admitting ignorance. This limits learning. Clear thinkers are comfortable saying, "I do not know." This statement does not diminish them, it strengthens them. Identity rooted in learning rather than knowing enhances clarity. Ambition interacts with identity as well. If your identity is heavily tied to achievement, decisions may become overly aggressive. You may take excessive risks to validate self-worth. Conversely, if identity is tied to stability, you may resist necessary risk. Balance emerges when identity is multifaceted. You are not only your career, not only your relationships, not only your achievements. A diversified identity reduces psychological volatility. When one area fluctuates, your entire self-concept does not collapse. This stability supports clearer decisions under pressure. Importantly, identity influences not only major life choices, but daily micro-decisions. Whether you exercise, whether you read, whether you confront a problem, each action reinforces identity. Over time, identity and behavior form a feedback loop. If you view yourself as disciplined, you act accordingly. Acting accordingly strengthens belief. If you view yourself as inconsistent, behavior aligns, reinforcing the narrative. Breaking negative loops requires intentional disruption. Act in contradiction to limiting identity. Even small actions can shift self-perception. For example, someone who believes they avoid conflict can practice one measured, respectful confrontation. That action weakens the rigid identity and expands future possibility. Clear thinking thrives when identity is dynamic, resilient, and evidence-based rather than emotionally rigid. As you refine your identity, decision-making becomes less defensive. You no longer need every choice to validate you. You no longer fear adjustment as weakness. You no longer interpret feedback as threat. You become more interested in truth than protection. And that shift is transformative. Because ultimately, clear thinking is not merely about information processing. It is about internal security. When you are secure enough to question yourself, revise yourself, and expand yourself, your decisions become grounded in reality rather than ego preservation. Chapter 6. Clarity without courage is useless. You can analyze thoroughly. You can identify biases. You can structure decisions carefully. You can align choices with values. But at the final moment, when action is required, something deeper determines the outcome. That force is courage, not dramatic bravery, not reckless boldness, not the loud, cinematic version of fearlessness. The courage required for clear thinking is quiet. It often goes unnoticed. But it is the dividing line between those who understand and those who execute. Many people know what they should do. Few consistently do it. Why? Because clarity often conflicts with comfort. When you think clearly, you may realize that a relationship requires confrontation, that a career path requires change, that a habit requires discipline, that an apology is necessary, that a boundary must be established. Clear thinking reveals truth. Courage applies it. The human mind is deeply wired to avoid discomfort. Psychological pain triggers similar neural pathways as physical pain. Rejection, embarrassment, uncertainty. These feel threatening. So even when clarity identifies the correct course, emotion resists. You may know that speaking up is necessary, but fear of conflict whispers restraint. You may know that ending something is healthy, but attachment whispers delay. You may know that beginning something new is aligned, but uncertainty whispers safety. In that moment, clarity competes with fear. Courage is the ability to act despite emotional resistance, not in absence of it. It is important to understand that fear itself is not a sign that a decision is wrong. Fear often accompanies growth. The brain interprets unfamiliar territory as potential danger, but unfamiliar does not mean harmful. It means new. Clear thinkers learn to distinguish between intuitive warning and avoidance anxiety. Intuitive warning is grounded in specific evidence. It points to concrete risks. It feels focused. Avoidance anxiety is vague. It exaggerates consequences. It feels expansive and catastrophic. For example, if starting a new project, intuitive warning might say, "You lack certain skills, prepare further." Avoidance anxiety might say, "If you try, you will fail publicly and lose respect permanently." Clarity identifies the difference. Courage acts appropriately. There is also courage in restraint. Sometimes the courageous action is not to move, but to wait. Not to respond, but to remain silent. Not to escalate, but to de-escalate. In emotionally charged situations, immediate reaction feels powerful. Deliberate calmness requires strength. The courage to pause is underestimated. In arguments, silence prevents regret. In negotiation, patience increases leverage. In crisis, composure stabilizes others. Yet the impulse to react immediately is strong because reaction relieves tension. Clear thinkers resist tension, relief when it compromises long-term outcome. Another dimension of courage involves social perception. Many decisions invite judgment. Changing careers, expressing unpopular opinions, ending familiar relationships, pursuing unconventional paths. These expose you to scrutiny. Human beings are socially sensitive. Reputation matters. Belonging matters. Disapproval feels threatening because historically, exclusion reduced survival probability. But modern life often demands independent judgment. Clarity may lead you away from collective comfort. Courage sustains that path. This does not mean rejecting all advice or dismissing community. It means accepting that not everyone will understand your reasoning. And understanding is not a prerequisite for correctness. There is also courage in admitting error. Clear thinking sometimes reveals that a previous decision was flawed. Pride may resist acknowledgement. Ego may defend justification. But correction strengthens integrity. Admitting error does not weaken credibility. Persistent denial does. The courageous mind values truth above image. Another powerful form of courage is long-term consistency. Many decisions are not dramatic turning points. They are daily commitments. Exercising when unmotivated, studying when distracted, saving when tempted to spend, practicing when bored. These actions lack excitement. They require sustained discipline rather than momentary intensity. Clear thinking identifies long-term benefit. Courage sustains repetition. Consistency is a quiet form of bravery. It means enduring short-term discomfort without immediate reward. It means trusting process over impulse. It means prioritizing future clarity over present ease. Courage also protects boundaries. When you think clearly about your limits, emotional, physical, professional, you may realize that certain behaviors from others are unacceptable. Communicating boundaries requires risk. The other person may react negatively. The relationship may shift. Yet without boundaries, resentment accumulates. And resentment clouds clarity. Clear thinkers address small misalignments early. Courage prevents long-term corrosion. there is also the courage to let go. Some decisions involve releasing identities, roles, or attachments that once defined you. Growth often requires shedding outdated versions of self. This process can feel destabilizing. Familiar discomfort may feel safer than unfamiliar potential. Clarity shows when something has ended internally. Courage accepts the transition externally. Letting go is not failure. It is adaptation. Another subtle area where courage operates is in delayed gratification. Many clear decisions produce benefits far in the future. Investing in education, building reputation slowly, repairing trust patiently. These require enduring uncertainty. Immediate rewards are tempting because they provide visible confirmation. Long-term investments operate in silence. Courage sustains invisible progress. Failure also tests courage. Clear thinking cannot eliminate all mistakes. When failure occurs, there is temptation to retreat permanently, to redefine identity around one outcome, to avoid re-engagement. But courage reframes failure as data rather than destiny. You ask, what did this teach me? What variable did I misjudge? How can I refine process? This orientation transforms setbacks into improvement rather than paralysis. It is important to note that courage grows through practice. It is not a fixed trait possessed by a select few. Each time you act in alignment with clear thinking despite discomfort, neural pathways strengthen. Future courage becomes easier. Avoidance, conversely, strengthens fear. The first difficult conversation is the hardest. The first boundary is the most uncomfortable. The first risk feels most intense. After repeated exposure, emotional response moderates. Courage builds resilience. There is also wisdom in calibrating courage. Acting boldly without clarity is recklessness. Acting cautiously despite clarity is stagnation. Balance emerges when analysis and action cooperate. Ask yourself, if fear were removed from this situation, what would I choose? Then ask, what realistic preparation reduces risk? This combination integrates bravery with prudence. Clear thinkers understand that waiting for fear to disappear is unrealistic. Fear diminishes through action, not anticipation. Sometimes courage appears as persistence in uncertainty. When outcomes are not guaranteed, doubt may surface repeatedly. Continuing forward requires internal steadiness. Other times, courage appears as strategic retreat. Recognizing when to stop investing in a failing direction requires strength. Ego often resists withdrawal because quitting feels like defeat. But intelligent withdrawal preserves resources for better opportunities. Courage is not stubbornness. It is alignment with clarity. As you integrate this understanding, you will notice a shift in how you experience difficult decisions. Fear will still arise, discomfort will still appear. But instead of interpreting these as stop signals, you will examine them as data points. You will ask, is this fear protecting me from harm or from growth? That question alone strengthens agency. Ultimately, the goal of clear thinking is not perfection. It is alignment. Alignment between reasoning, values, and action. Without action, clarity remains theoretical. With action, it transforms life trajectory. Chapter 7. Most people overestimate the impact of dramatic decisions and underestimate the power of small, repeated ones. They imagine life changing through singular turning points, a major opportunity, a sudden breakthrough, a bold leap. And while such moments exist, they are rare. What shapes most lives is something quieter, accumulated judgment. Every day you make dozens of small decisions that feel insignificant. Whether to respond immediately or pause. Whether to assume intent or ask for clarification. Whether to spend or save, whether to learn or scroll, whether to confront gently or suppress resentment. Each choice seems minor, but over time, these micro-decisions compound. Clear thinking compounds. Just as financial investments grow through consistent contributions, mental discipline grows through repeated application. The difference between a reactive life and a deliberate life often lies not in intelligence, but in accumulated small clarity. Consider financial decision-making. One impulsive purchase is not catastrophic, but repeated impulsive spending creates long-term instability. Conversely, small consistent savings rarely feel dramatic. Yet, over years, they create freedom. The same principle applies to relationships. Ignoring small misunderstandings feels easier in the moment. Addressing them requires discomfort. But unaddressed friction compounds into resentment. Clear communication early prevents rupture later. In career development, minor habits determine trajectory. Showing up prepared, meeting deadlines, refining skill quietly, seeking feedback without defensiveness. These actions rarely receive applause. But over time, reputation forms around reliability and depth. Reputation itself is a compound result of thinking quality. When you consistently pause before speaking, your words carry weight. When you evaluate risk before acting, your judgment earns trust. When you admit mistakes without excuse, credibility strengthens. Trust builds slowly, and it builds on patterns. Clear thinking creates stable patterns. Another compounding effect occurs internally. Emotional volatility decreases when decisions are deliberate. Anxiety reduces because you trust your evaluation process. Regret diminishes because actions were thoughtful rather than impulsive. This internal stability is subtle but profound. It changes how you carry yourself. It changes how you approach conflict. It changes how others perceive you. Over time, clear thinking transforms identity. You begin to see yourself as someone capable of handling complexity, someone who does not rush, someone who examines before concluding. This self-perception strengthens future decisions. The feedback loop becomes positive. The compound effect also operates in learning. When you consistently question assumptions, your understanding deepens year by year. When you seek disconfirming evidence, your perspective widens. When you reflect after decisions, your frameworks refine. Many individuals repeat the same mistakes for decades because they never analyze outcomes properly. They react, experience consequence, move forward without reflection, and repeat. Clear thinkers review outcomes calmly. What worked? What did not? What variable was misjudged? What emotional bias was present? This reflection converts experience into wisdom. Without reflection, experience alone does not guarantee growth. It guarantees repetition. Compounding clarity also protects against crisis escalation. Small issues handled early rarely become emergencies. Minor financial discipline prevents severe debt. Minor health adjustments prevent major deterioration. Minor relational honesty prevents emotional collapse. Avoidance compounds negatively. Attention compounds positively. There is also a compounding effect in opportunity recognition. When your thinking is clear, you notice patterns others miss. You identify leverage points. You recognize when timing aligns. Because your mind is not clouded by constant emotional noise, perception sharpens. This does not mean life becomes predictable. Uncertainty remains, but your response to uncertainty improves. Another important long-term effect is resilience. When you consistently apply structured thinking, setbacks lose their power to destabilize identity. A failed project becomes a variable error, not personal inadequacy. A disagreement becomes communication, misalignment, not rejection. This mental framing reduces emotional exhaustion. Over decades, this matters enormously. People rarely burn out solely from workload. They burn out from chaotic thinking, constant overreaction, constant rumination, constant self-doubt. Clear thinking reduces unnecessary mental friction. It simplifies internal dialogue. You do not replay every conversation endlessly because you addressed issues clearly. You do not obsess over every outcome because you evaluated thoroughly before acting. You do not panic at every challenge because you trust your problem-solving process. Peace emerges gradually. There is also a social compounding effect. Others begin to rely on your stability. They seek your perspective during uncertainty. They value your measured response. Leadership often arises naturally from consistent clarity. Leadership is less about charisma and more about steadiness. In professional environments, those who think clearly under pressure become anchors. In personal environments, those who communicate clearly reduce conflict. Over time, disreliability attracts responsibility and opportunity. However, compounding works in reverse as well. Repeated impulsivity compounds instability. Frequent emotional decisions erode trust. Persistent avoidance compounds anxiety. Small dishonesty compounds reputational damage. The difference between these two trajectories is rarely visible in a single moment. It becomes obvious across years. This is why daily discipline matters more than occasional intensity. Clear thinking is not a personality upgrade achieved overnight. It is a lifelong refinement. You will still experience emotional days. You will still encounter unexpected variables. But baseline quality improves. There is also an existential dimension to compounding clarity. When you think clearly, you align actions with values more consistently. Over years, this alignment produces coherence. Your life story makes sense to you. Decisions connect logically. There is less fragmentation between who you are privately and how you act publicly. This coherence reduces internal conflict. Many individuals experience subtle dissatisfaction because their daily decisions contradict long-term intentions. They say they value health but neglect it. They say they value honesty but avoid difficult truth. They say they value growth but resist discomfort. Clear thinking reduces these contradictions. You become more integrated. Integration produces quiet confidence. Importantly, compounding clarity requires forgiveness. You will make imperfect decisions. You will misjudge situations. The key is correction, not self-punishment. Self-criticism clouds future thinking. Honest evaluation refines it. Consistency does not mean rigidity. It means returning to process repeatedly. Over a decade, the difference between reactive and reflective decision-making becomes dramatic. One life feels chaotic, driven by emotion and external pressure. The other feels stable, deliberate, adaptive. Both individuals may face similar external circumstances. The divergence arises internally. The compound effect is invisible daily but undeniable long-term. Imagine two individuals starting from similar positions. One reacts frequently, avoids discomfort, seeks immediate relief. The other pauses, evaluates, tolerates uncertainty, aligns with values. In 1 year, difference may be small. In 10 years, trajectories separate significantly. Clear thinking is quiet leverage. It does not promise instant success. It promises reduced self-sabotage. And often, avoiding self-sabotage is the greatest advantage available. As you integrate everything from previous chapters, emotional regulation, attention control, bias awareness, structured frameworks, identity refinement, courage, remember that their true power lies in repetition. Every time you pause before reacting, you strengthen discipline. Every time you examine assumptions, you strengthen objectivity. Every time you act despite discomfort, you strengthen courage. Over time, these strengths stabilize into character, and character determines destiny more reliably than circumstance. At some point, clear thinking stops being a technique and becomes a way of living. It is no longer something you try to do. It becomes how you move through the world. You begin to notice that clarity is not only about decisions. It is about presence. It is about how you listen, how you interpret, how you respond, how you evaluate yourself, how you evaluate others, how you engage with uncertainty. Clear thinking is not a mental trick. It is a disciplined relationship with reality. Reality is often inconvenient. It does not always align with preference. It does not adjust itself to protect ego. It does not simplify itself for emotional comfort. To think clearly is to approach reality without distortion as much as possible, and then respond deliberately rather than reactively. This is a lifelong practice. You will never eliminate bias entirely. You will never silence emotion completely. You will never achieve perfect foresight, but perfection is not required. Improvement is, over time, something subtle shifts inside you. You become less impressed by dramatic opinions and more interested in quiet evidence. You become less reactive to provocation and more curious about cause. You become less attached to being right and more committed to understanding. This shift changes your interactions profoundly. When someone disagrees with you, you no longer interpret it as personal threat. You ask questions. When someone criticizes you, you evaluate substance before emotion. When someone praises you, you appreciate it without allowing it to distort self-perception. Your internal state stabilizes. Stability is not boredom. It is strength without volatility. In a world that rewards loud certainty, clear thinking may initially appear slow. Others may rush ahead with confidence. They may speak faster, decide faster, react faster. But speed without structure eventually creates cracks. Clarity may move more deliberately, but it builds foundations that endure. One of the greatest long-term benefits of thinking clearly is reduced regret. Regret often stems from impulsivity, words spoken without reflection, commitments made without evaluation, risks taken without assessment, silence maintained when courage was required. When you consistently apply clarity, even imperfect outcomes feel acceptable. You know you examined variables honestly. You know you aligned with values. You know you acted consciously rather than reactively. This removes a heavy psychological burden. Another transformation occurs in how you experience uncertainty. For many people, uncertainty triggers anxiety. They crave guarantees. They seek constant reassurance. They interpret ambiguity as danger. But life is inherently uncertain. Attempting to eliminate uncertainty creates chronic stress. Clear thinking reframes uncertainty as normal rather than threatening. Instead of asking, "How can I be completely sure?" you ask, "Given what I know, what is the most reasonable step?" You accept that new information may emerge later. You adjust when necessary. This flexibility prevents paralysis. There is also a moral dimension to clear thinking. When your reasoning improves, your fairness improves. You judge less harshly because you understand complexity. You blame less quickly because you consider context. You speak more carefully because you value accuracy. Clarity increases responsibility. You stop hiding behind emotional justification. You stop exaggerating narratives to win arguments. You stop simplifying people into categories. You become more precise and more compassionate. Precision and compassion are not opposites. They support each other. When you understand how easily perception distorts, you extend patience to others. You recognize that they, too, are navigating biases and emotions. This awareness reduces unnecessary conflict. At the same time, clarity strengthens boundaries. Compassion does not require tolerating disrespect. Understanding does not require surrendering standards. Clear thinking balances empathy with firmness. As years pass, this balance becomes natural. You also begin to notice how much of the world operates on reaction. News cycles amplify outrage. Social platforms reward impulsivity. Conversations escalate quickly. In contrast, you operate at a different rhythm. You pause before responding. You verify before believing. You reflect before concluding. This rhythm protects mental energy. Mental energy is finite. Constant emotional reactivity drains it. Clear thinking conserves it. You choose where to invest attention. You avoid unnecessary debates. You focus on areas where influence exists. This selective engagement creates quiet power. Power not in dominance, but in control over your own mind. Perhaps the most important integration is this: clear thinking is not separate from character. It shapes character. When you consistently choose truth over comfort, integrity strengthens. When you consistently choose long-term over short-term, discipline strengthens. When you consistently choose reflection over reaction, wisdom strengthens. Character is the cumulative result of internal decisions, and character determines how you navigate success as well as failure. Success without clarity often breeds arrogance. Failure without clarity often breeds shame. But when clarity is present, success is evaluated realistically, and failure becomes informative rather than defining. This emotional equilibrium becomes one of your greatest assets. There will still be difficult days, moments when emotion surges unexpectedly, situations that test patience, decisions that feel overwhelming. Clear thinking does not remove difficulty. It provides structure within it. During crisis, you return to fundamentals. Define the problem precisely. Separate fact from interpretation. Expand the time horizon. Assess probability. Consider trade-offs. Align with values. Act with courage. This sequence becomes instinctive through repetition, and with each repetition, confidence deepens. Not loud confidence, steady confidence. The kind that does not require constant validation. The kind that does not collapse under criticism. The kind that does not inflate under praise. Ultimately, thinking clearly and making better decisions is not about controlling every outcome. It is about controlling your contribution to the outcome. You cannot control external events completely. You cannot control other people's behavior entirely. But you can control your analysis, your integrity, your response. That is enough. Over decades, the individual who thinks clearly may not always move fastest, but they move consistently. They recover efficiently. They build trust steadily. They sleep peacefully more often. Peace of mind is not accidental. It is constructed through disciplined cognition. If there is one final principle to carry forward, it is this: pause is power. In the pause, emotion settles. In the pause, bias becomes visible. In the pause, identity loosens. In the pause, courage gathers. Between stimulus and response lies choice, and within that choice lies the quality of your life. You do not need extraordinary intelligence to think clearly. You need awareness, structure, humility, and courage, practiced repeatedly. The world will continue to move quickly. Opinions will multiply. Pressure will rise and fall. But if you cultivate clarity, you will remain steady within movement. And steady minds build meaningful lives. Clear thinking is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is not urgent. It is deliberate. And over time, deliberation becomes wisdom. This is not the end of a book. It is the beginning of a practice. Each decision from this moment forward is an opportunity to apply it. Human beings are wired to try, to intervene, and to manipulate outcomes in pursuit of comfort and certainty. But reality is far larger than any single individual. People, circumstances, and events often move beyond our influence. Clinging to them does not create change. It creates stress, anxiety, and exhaustion. Learning to release what you cannot control is not surrender. It is clarity in action. It is the understanding that your energy has limits, and that directing it wisely is far more effective than expending it on resistance. Letting go begins with observation. Notice where your mind becomes entangled in outcomes beyond your reach. Perhaps it is worrying about what someone else thinks, fretting over an event that may or may not occur, or replaying past mistakes endlessly. These thoughts feel urgent, but they are powerless. By identifying them, you can separate the signal from the noise. Focus on what is within your control, your response, your preparation, your attitude, and release the rest. This distinction is the core of mental freedom. Resistance to letting go often stems from fear. People fear loss, uncertainty, or appearing weak. They fear that releasing control is equivalent to giving up. Yet experience shows the opposite. Acceptance of what is uncontrollable creates clarity, allowing you to act decisively where influence is real. You conserve energy, maintain emotional balance, and reduce wasted effort. In practice, this may mean preparing thoroughly for a project while accepting that outcomes depend on variables outside your control. It may mean holding your boundaries firmly while acknowledging that others may still act unpredictably. It may mean doing your best in relationships while understanding that you cannot change the feelings or actions of others. Another dimension is detachment. Detachment does not imply apathy or indifference. It implies perspective. When you detach from the outcome, you can assess reality more objectively. Emotional entanglement clouds judgment. Detachment allows you to observe patterns, anticipate challenges, and make decisions grounded in clarity rather than anxiety. Detachment is what enables a professional to perform under pressure, a parent to guide without micromanaging, and an individual to remain steady amid chaos. Letting go also requires forgiveness of yourself and others. Holding on to resentment, guilt, or regret anchors you in the past. It distorts your perception and influences your decisions unconsciously. By forgiving, you remove the mental weight, allowing decisions to emerge from reason rather than reaction. This is especially critical in relationships, where lingering grievances can shape choices unconsciously. Releasing these internal burdens does not excuse harmful behavior. It simply allows you to act clearly without being driven by unresolved emotion. Acceptance of uncertainty is closely tied to this principle. Life is inherently unpredictable. No amount of planning can guarantee specific outcomes. Attempting to control every variable is a form of self-imposed suffering. By embracing uncertainty, you stop resisting reality and start responding to it. You cultivate patience and adaptability. You learn to observe trends, prepare contingencies, and respond flexibly. These skills transform unpredictability from a source of anxiety into a source of insight. One practical approach is to categorize concerns. Ask yourself, which aspects of this situation are within my control and which are not? Focus energy exclusively on the first category. Allocate preparation, effort, and attention accordingly. Release attachment to the second category. This practice becomes a habit. Over time, your mind automatically prioritizes actionable elements, leaving extraneous worry behind. You notice a new sense of mental spaciousness, a capacity to think more clearly, and a freedom previously unknown. Another subtle but powerful effect is emotional resilience. When you let go, setbacks hurt less because you are no longer attempting to force outcomes. Failures are evaluated as data rather than personal attacks. Disappointment becomes manageable because expectations are realistic. You develop a rhythm of effort and observation rather than obsession, creating a sustainable approach to challenges. This perspective strengthens long-term decision-making because your choices are no longer filtered through fear, resistance, or frustration. They emerge from reason, values, and strategic assessment. Letting go also enhances creativity. When the mind is no longer consumed with controlling uncontrollable variables, space opens for insight. Patterns become visible, solutions emerge, and opportunities previously masked by anxiety become apparent. People who cling to control often miss these subtle shifts because they are preoccupied with resistance. Freedom of mind amplifies problem-solving ability and clarity of judgment. It allows you to respond fluidly to complex situations rather than react reflexively. Finally, letting go is a daily practice rather than a singular decision. Every situation presents new variables, unexpected outcomes, and moments of potential resistance. Each day offers opportunities to observe, release, and redirect. The more consistently you practice, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, your mind automatically discards the unchangeable, conserves energy for influence, and maintains emotional equilibrium. This is not a momentary relief. It is a structural change in cognition and response. By integrating this principle into your life, you will notice subtle but profound changes. Stress diminishes, decisions sharpen, patience grows, emotional energy is preserved for actions that truly matter. Clarity becomes habitual. And in the intersection of effort and acceptance lies a quiet power, a power that allows you to navigate life with focus, resilience, and peace. Letting go does not mean you do not care. It means you care intelligently. It means your attention is allocated where it produces the greatest effect. It means your mind is clear, unburdened, and ready to respond with precision. And that clarity, above all else, is the foundation of a life well lived.